You're very welcome to the first of a number of webinars devised to support boards of management in the effective management of their schools. This series of webinars is based on the national module of training, the board as a corporate entity. Our first webinar explores the functions and responsibilities of a board as set out in legislation. Whilst it might be a heavy topic to begin with, it is important to explore it at the outset so that board members are aware of their collective responsibility as well as their individual roles. Boards of management of primary schools are appointed for a 4-year term. The term of office for current boards of management is from the 1st of December 2019 to the 30th of November 2023. And all boards are required to adhere to the provisions of the Governance Manual for Primary Schools 2019 to 2023. This is the board members' go-to document, and it is important that each member of the board is provided with a copy and that they take the time to become familiar with its contents. When board members sign their declaration of acceptance of membership of the School Board of Management, they declare that they will undertake to adhere to the provisions of the Governance Manual for Primary Schools and all other rules, regulations, relevant legislation, and Department of Education circulars relating to the membership and operation of the boards. This slide gives an overview of where the Board of Management sits within the governance structure. The Education Act of 1998 is the key piece of legislation that governs the provision for the education of every person in the state, including any person with a disability or who has other special educational needs. The Act sets out the functions and responsibilities of all key partners in the schooling system, including the Board of Management. There is a raft of other legislation that applies to schools: employment legislation, health and safety, data protection, child protection, school admissions, etc., to name but a few. We will reference various legislative responsibilities throughout the webinars. The Minister for Education and Skills sets policy through legislation and circular letters. The responsibility for implementing policy devolves to the schools. A Board of Management acts on behalf of the patron to ensure that it carries out its statutory duty as per Section 15 of the Education Act. In the case of Catholic schools, the patron is the bishop. The board manages the school on behalf of the patron and is accountable to the patron and to the minister. The principal is responsible for the day-to-day management of the school, including the guidance and direction of the teachers and other staff. The principal is also responsible for the implementation of decisions made by the board and is accountable to the board for this management. At every Board of Management meeting, the principal gives a report to the board on the day-to-day life and the functioning of the school. The issues reported to the board may vary according to the time of year. The board, as well as being accountable to the patron, is also accountable to the minister. The inspectorate carry out school inspections to evaluate the quality of the school management and leadership, the quality of teaching, learning and assessment, and the school's own planning and self-review. Copies of any reports carried out by the inspectorate are sent to the patron. This extract from the Education Act sets out the overarching duty of the board. It shall be the duty of a board to manage the school on behalf of the patron and for the benefit of the students and their parents, and to provide or cause to be provided an appropriate education for each student at the school for which that board has responsibility. In carrying out its functions and managing the school on behalf of the patron, the board must act in accordance with the law and with any ministerial policy. The board must uphold the characteristic spirit of the school and be accountable to the patron for this. In the Education Act of 1998, the characteristic spirit of the school is determined by the cultural, educational, moral, religious, social, linguistic and spiritual values and traditions which inform and are characteristic of the objectives and conduct of the school. The board must inform itself as to the characteristic spirit of a Catholic school so that they are in a position to take the appropriate measures to uphold the ethos. and we'll address the characteristic spirit of a Catholic school in another webinar. The board must consult with and inform the patron of decisions and proposals. Publish the school's policy on admission to and participation in the school, that is the enrolment policy, including its policy on expulsion and suspension of students, admission and participation by students with disabilities or with other special educational needs. Boards must ensure that the school's admissions policy is compliant with the Education Admission to Schools Act 2018, which required boards to review their enrolment policy in accordance with the legislation and to submit the policy to the patron for approval. In carrying out its functions in managing the school on behalf of the patron, the board must also promote respect for the diversity of values, beliefs, traditions, languages, and ways of life in our changing society. Have regard to the efficient use of resources, particularly the grants provided by the state. Use the resources provided by the state to make reasonable provision and accommodation for students with disabilities or special needs, including, if necessary, the adaptation of buildings or provision of special equipment. Section 18 of the Education Act sets out the board's responsibility in terms of school finances. The board must ensure that school accounts are properly audited or certified annually in accordance with best accounting practice. It is obliged to have comprehensive insurance cover for the school. It must keep proper accounts, which may be audited by the Department of Education and Skills and/or the Comptroller and Auditor General. Its annual accounts must be available to the patron and the school community and should be submitted annually to the Financial Support Services Unit, that's the FSSU, and we'll look at school finances in a later webinar. The Board of Management is the employer of teachers and other staff of the school, and with that comes all of the responsibilities of the employer in respect of employment legislation, sectoral agreements, and subject to relevant department circulars which set out the terms and conditions of teachers and SNAs. Although teachers and SNAs are paid directly by the Department of Education and Skills, the contract of employment is with the Board of Management. Salaries of other employees, for example, the secretary, caretaker, bus escort, etc., are paid directly by the school with the assistance of designated grants. And the board must ensure that staff are recruited and appointed in accordance with the relevant procedures outlined in department circulars, because these are statutory procedures. So who is on the Board of Management? So for the purposes of this webinar, we'll focus on schools with more than one teacher. So for schools with more than one teacher, you have two direct appointees or nominees of the patron. You have the principal teacher or the acting principal. One other teacher on the staff of the school elected by vote of the teaching staff, including the principal. Two elected parents of children enrolled in the school, one mother and one father. And two extra members from the community proposed by the other 6 members. In one teacher schools, there are just 4 board members, one from each of these constituent groups. And there is also provision in the governance manual for a shared governance arrangement between 2 schools with a board of management of 12 members, subject to the agreement of the patron. The patron appoints the chairperson of the board. Neither the principal nor the teacher nominee can be the chairperson. Once appointed, the members act collectively to manage the school on behalf of the patron. The individual members of the board are appointed through different procedures, but once appointed, they must act together as a unit. The members of the board form a corporate group with a particular purpose and commitment. Members of the board act together. Even if they're nominated by a particular group, members on the board are not representing that group, nor are they delegates of their electorates, but they act in the interest of the whole school community. And we'll look at this a little bit more in our next webinar. The following is a legal definition of a body corporate. A succession or collection of persons having, in the estimation of the law, an existence and rights and duties separate from those of the persons who form it from time to time. So when we speak about a board of management being a body corporate, we mean that it is a group of persons that act as an entity. The members of the board or that entity may change from time to time, but it's still the same board. This means that decisions of a previous board is binding on the current board. Of course, decisions can be reviewed, but a newly formed board cannot refuse to honour the decisions of the previous board. Technically and legally, there is no new board. The board is a permanent as a corporate entity, but the members may change. Section 14 of the Education Act indemnifies the board and the members of the board for any claims made against them. The Allianz Custodian School Protection Policy, which is the insurance policy for Catholic schools, covers the individual members of the board and the board as a corporate body for any such claims. This cover applies providing that the board members are acting in good faith, and that means informed good faith, in accordance with the Governance Manual for Primary Schools, legislation, Department of Education circulars, etc. Under the Charities Act 2009, there is a requirement for each Board of Management to have its school registered with the Charities Regulator and to verify this information once a year. As part of the registration process, Board of Management members, as charity trustees, are required to provide their name, start date on the board, and residential address. Residential addresses provided will not be made public on the register. Boards are also required to indicate which board member is the chairperson. The Charities Regulator has advised the Department of Education that boards of management that comply with the provisions of this document, the Governance Manual for Primary Schools, also meet the requirements set out by the regulator in the Charities Governance Code. So thank you for viewing this training webinar. If you have any query in relation to any aspect of the content, please contact our advice line. The contact details are as follows. CPSMA education advisors are available at any stage from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. to speak with school principals and chairpersons to answer any further specific queries. In our next webinar, we will look at the roles and responsibilities of board members.